Hey, I'm Will Parker Anderson, the host of the Writer Circle podcast, which you're about to watch. It's a huge help to us if you would just like this video and subscribe to our channel because we want you to be a part of our writing community. Enjoy the show. Our team truly speaks so highly of you.
Oh, wow.
The things that I think consistently come up, they say you're hardworking, you're really fun to work with, and you have a lot of good ideas. So that's what I hear about you.
I've enjoyed working with the Waterbrook team as well. So yeah, they've been good to me. Everyone over there has been good to me.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's do this. So I'll just kind of pause and then we'll get going.
Yep.
Well, Jordan, it's so good to have you on the show. As someone who's read Redeeming Your Time, one of your books, I know you take seriously stewarding your day, and so it means a lot that you've carved out this time to have this conversation. And I'm really excited to talk to you because I think you truly have some unique perspective to offer up-and-coming writers, even those that have written for a while, which is a huge portion of our audience. And so these are people who are called to write, who want to publish a book, who are eager to grow their platform so that publishers, honestly take them seriously. And so I would love maybe if we could start with some of your publishing story. So when did you first realize that you wanted to write a book?
Man. Well, first of all, Will, I told you this before we start recording. You're going to have no trouble getting guests on this show because we never get to talk about this stuff as writers. We only ever talk about the content, not the craft. So this is so much fun. I love talking about this. I probably have 700 notes in Evernote just around craft that I'm constantly working with.
Can you share every single one of them in an hour?
I'll share them all. A lot of them are from Taylor Swift. So, I can point you to the podcast.
Yes.
All right. So when did I decide I wanted to write a book? I don't know, man. I don't know that I ever said, one day I want to write a book, although I'm sure that was rolling around in the back of my head. Yeah. But when I was running this really interesting tech startup back in 2012, 2013, that's my background, by the way. For those who don't know, I've spent 15 years of my life primarily working as a tech entrepreneur. We were just going through a really crazy growth curve and had some incredible experience. I was speaking on a lot of big stages on behalf of that venture. I was like, man, there's some really good stories that point to some really valuable lessons for other entrepreneurs. I'm going to write a book. So I self-published that book. I self-published another one about a year after. This is 2014, 2015. The second self-published title was basically a pamphlet. Thank God. I don't think you could buy it on Amazon anymore. I think maybe we finally got it off of there. Yeah, exactly. But it was around that time, man, where I, through a long series of events, understood for the first time in my life that my work as an entrepreneur had intrinsic value to God, meaning that I understood prior to 2014, 2015 that my work had instrumental value in that, I can use my role as an entrepreneur to share the gospel with others, or I can use my role as an entrepreneur to write a check to the missionary on my refrigerator. But I never before then understood that the 99% of my time I spent at work not sharing the gospel mattered to God. And when I got that, it changed everything. I mean, it made me come truly fully alive, I think, for the first time, Monday through Friday. And so I just had to chase down what this meant for my role as an entrepreneur. I had read Every Good Endeavor, which had come out about that time by Tim Keller, which is a general faith workbook, which was great and transformative. But I had really specific questions about, how does the gospel shape my specific work as a founder, as an entrepreneur? Yeah. And so I went out initially just doing interviews and research just for my own purposes. And then one day, I don't think it was very far into that process, realized, this is a book. And I think I got as soon as I got the first line of the book, which this book is called Called to Create, which we published in 2017, that God is the first entrepreneur, I was like, this is the thing. This is the book. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of instantly knew, man, that this was a bigger book. It was a bigger idea, and that I wanted to take a shot at traditional publishing for the first time. I had a little bit of success in self-publishing. I wanted to take a shot at traditional. And so by God's grace, Got connected through a mutual friend to a phenomenal agent who I'm still with today. And the rest is history. So we did a deal with Baker Books, signed a contract in 2016 when I was running this big tech startup. And a book came out in November 2017, hit a couple of the bestseller lists. And that's when I went and started hanging out with you and your team at Penguin Random House, and specifically Waterbrook Multnomah. So after Called to Create, Random House came and offered me a great deal on my second title, Master of One. Ended up doing 7 books contracted with Waterbrook.
Let's
and that
go.
kind of brings us up to present day. Let's go.
Yeah. Well, glad you came over to the light side from the dark side. Just kidding. If anyone from Baker's listening, we love you. Yeah, that's great.
I love you.
So, and I want to circle back to that in a little bit. Just your story specifically. I know a little bit about sort of how you geared up to seek your first book deal and grow your platform. Yeah. And like I said at the beginning, that wasn't just lip service. I really think you can speak poignantly and most importantly, practically to what it looks like as an up and coming author to actually make it happen. So I'm just going to tease that now, and then people can keep listening if they want your goods on platform building. But I wanted to talk about feedback because, my goodness, 7 books with us, a book with Baker. You also have a weekly devotional that you put out called The Word Before Work. So that's a lot of writing. I'd love to talk about feedback and what that looks like. You've written about things like deliberate practice, which is, for those who are unfamiliar, it's practicing under the tutelage of experts who are giving you kind of direct feedback versus just doing it on your own. So let's put aside the professional editor that you receive when you publish a book. What would your recommendations be for people who are looking to do more deliberate practice and get solid, robust feedback, also taking into account, I hear this a lot, that it's vulnerable and it's scary, and people are like, I'm not sure I fully want that, and if I want to see my work get shredded. So any encouragements, tips, best practices?
Yeah, oh my gosh. Have a whole lot of humility going into the process, right? I'll say this. If you want to truly master anything, and I wrote about this in my book, Master of One, you have to understand the differences between what scientists call naive practice and deliberate or purposeful practice. And purposeful practice is characterized by a few things, one of which is, feedback from experts. That would be an editor, somebody who's actually written really good stuff. But I would argue it's more than that for writers and even entrepreneurs, because I still think of myself as an entrepreneur, formerly selling software, but today just selling content products. And yes, the feedback from the editor is really important, but so is feedback from the customer. And so I remember when I was writing Called to Create, as soon as I got done with the chapter, I shared it with my wife and my business partner at the time, who I was really writing this book for. He was a fellow believer, and he got it. He was kind of the target persona for that title, right? And so I think you got to have a ton of humility. I still have to remind myself of a lot of these things as I'm going through the editing process of remembering that if customers have agreed to give me feedback on an early draft, they are rooting for my success. And so, number one, not to take their notes personally, but number two, to also keep in mind, and this is true whether you're getting early reader feedback or feedback from a professional editor, that while their suggested solution might not be right, if they say there's a problem that you have to fix, right? And so being able to kind of sort out the difference between those two things has been really, really helpful to me. So before receiving, for example, an editorial letter from an editor, being able to say, okay, great, I might not agree with everything that Becky says about how to solve this, but if Becky says there's a problem, and I got to find a way to solve it.
Yeah. Moral of the story is always listen to Becky. So take us to that moment. Another author was sharing this with me, that moment where you're getting your first round of feedback from an editor. Because for some people, this might be an experience they've only had a handful of times or that they've never had, and they'd be really interested to know what this is like. So Take us to that moment. What are you thinking and feeling? How have you learned to sort of steady your emotions? Another author was just telling me that the first time he experienced this, his wife was like holding his hand and rubbing his back and he felt really fragile. And she, met him in that moment. And I love his vulnerability and honesty there. But for you, and you're many rounds in now of experiencing this, but I'm sure it's still difficult at times. So what's going through your head and heart?
Yeah, a lot of mess. A lot of mess, Will. So, I mean, I've just disciplined myself to just real practically pray before receive. Usually you get a heads up and like, hey, notes are coming, next Friday. Yeah. So I'm trying to be in prayer and preparation for that document. Just prayer for humility and pray that I would also be content with the input that I put into the project rather than the outcome necessarily, right? The outcome of that editorial process. I'm the only one who knows if I believe I've been faithful with the talents God has put in my hand. And if I have, if I can honestly look at a draft and say, this is the very best that I know how to do, then I think I'm pleasing my Heavenly Father with that, regardless of what edits I receive in return from an editor, right? So, man, that's just it. It's nothing more complicated than that for me. It is prayer and then just keeping in mind, again, that this person, whoever's giving me feedback, has the best interest of the project at heart, right? And so I need to lean into that and really understand what's being said through the editorial process so I can fix things for readers. But I'm a really big believer. I should say this before we move on from feedback. And I've alluded to it already, but and not just getting feedback from editors, but really getting tons of feedback from your customer, from your early reader. So I do this at almost every stage of the writing process. I try to collect subjective data, but also really objective data of like, hey, rate every single chapter on a scale of 1 to 5 stars, right? To try to make the thing better and better, and look at the data over dozens of early readers to know where I really need to sink my teeth into on the editorial process.
Gotcha. And how do you do that? Is this people from your email list? Do you have a landing page where people can sign up, or?
This is good. So as I'm writing, I'm sharing the book with really close friends, like tight community, 2-3 people, right? Then once draft 1 is done, I do go to some subset of my audience. Oftentimes that'll be my paid community. So I have a paid community called the Mere Christians community that gets first dibs at this. If I decide I want more feedback, I'll segment my list, basically look at 5-star subscribers who I think are in my target demo, and offer them an invitation to read the early draft. And early drafts of books suck. Like reading a PDF is the worst experience ever. So you're going to be really hard pressed to get people to do it. But what I do is at the end of the PDF, at the end of every single chapter, including the introduction and epilogue, I just say, hey, before you move on to the next chapter, please go to jordanraynor.com/feedback to review this book. And I'm always asking, I'm trying to remember if I can remember all the questions. It's not very many, but hey, rate this chapter on a 1 to 5 star scale as if you were rating it as a standalone product on Amazon. And then I ask what could make this chapter stronger. And that's pretty much it. It's kind of like a net promoter score survey, like really, really simple 2 questions and then move on. And then when they get to the end of the book, I have them answer a few additional questions about the product before they wrap it up. Gotcha. And then, of course, I take all that data and then email it to them on launch day and say, hey, will you copy and paste this and post it to Amazon as a review? We track that stuff a year in advance to regurgitate to people and post online.
Wow. That's robust. Yeah, I don't think there's a ton of authors doing that. I can totally see how you're bringing your digital marketing knowledge to bear on the writing process, which is super smart. I've heard you use the term authorpreneur before. So can you unpack how you think like an entrepreneur, what that means, and why that's valuable in today's literary landscape?
Yeah, I mean, what do I mean by it? All I mean by it is that I really think of myself as an entrepreneur first and a writer second. Writing is the one vehicle through which I am an entrepreneur. What is an entrepreneur? An entrepreneur is somebody who takes a risk to create something new for the good of others. Or to state it a little bit more concretely and practically, an entrepreneur is somebody who sees a gap in the market, right? Who creates a product to bridge that gap and sets up systems for that product to be sold without their direct involvement over time, right? That's what I've done throughout my career as a tech entrepreneur. It's what I do today as a writer, right? And selling content products. And I think you were giving me some kind words right before we started recording about the Waterbrook team really enjoying working with me. And I think, you could tell me if I'm wrong here, right? But I've been told by some people in this industry that one of the reasons why publishers like working with me is I am willing to hustle hard to sell books. I just did 80 interviews over 3-4 months on my latest title, The Sacredness of Secular Work, right? Like my agent tells publishers all the time, like nobody's going to outwork Jordan Raynor. But I also think like a marketer as I'm making the product, right? Like I think the difference between artists and entrepreneurs is artists make what they want to consume and entrepreneurs make and write what the market wants to consume. And there's a balance there, right? Like if I'm not interested in the topic, then I'm like at all, then I'm not going to write the book. But if I got 5 options on my plate of titles that I'm thinking about bringing to market, I'm always going to opt for the one that I have the most data around the market wanting, and the market primarily being my existing audience and then secondary and tertiary audiences from there. So I think that's really valuable because listen, like, you know this, Will, publishers are constantly looking for authors who have a platform, know how to build a platform, know how to build a tribe, and are willing to do the really freaking hard work of going out and hustling and selling the book. I track all my time via software called Harvest. I've been doing this for 12 years voluntarily. Nobody makes me do it. I spend roughly 50% of my time on a book marketing and publicizing it as I do making the thing. So I spend just as much time launching it, selling it, marketing it as I do writing the title.
Yeah. That's a really helpful metric and one that not many would have. You know, if you ask your average author, how much time do you spend marketing versus writing? They'd be like, I don't know. I could guess, but you actually know because you've tracked it. That's really useful. Let's talk about your process. Now, some of this is a little bit subjective because we all operate differently, but I mean, you're putting out a steady stream of content, not just your contracted books, but your weekly newsletter, devotional. So what is kind of your ideal writing environment? You can be as specific as you want. You know, where are you? What time of day is it? Do you have a favorite drink in hand? Are you listening to music? You know, just whatever you'd want to share. And then along with that, how do you block out distraction? And how much time, you know, are you spending in one go at writing, and what are your expectations for those times? So those are just some of the things we'd love to hear about your process.
Man. Well, listen, I'll say this on the front end. I'll share how I do this, and I know it's what you're asking. I hate it when authors say that this is the way to do it. I think there's many ways to produce 5-star nonfiction content. This is just my way. So I do write at the same time pretty much every day, Monday through Friday. I've been in this habit now for almost 10 years. So I was writing Called to Create in 2015, 2016, something like that. And I was writing at the same time, first thing in the morning, before I check email, before I work on anything else. I'm blocking out between 90 and 120 minutes for a block of writing the next piece of intellectual property. And I'm no longer limiting that to books. I'm actually currently developing a show for television that's occupying that block. But the ritual is the same. So I'm usually bringing my second cup of coffee for the day, as well as a cup of water up to my home office. Usually these days it's my home office. For the last 5 years or so it's been. I'm putting my Sony noise canceling headphones on so I don't hear our little kids running around downstairs and getting out the door for school. And that's pretty much it, man. I mean, I I'm weird in that my phone is always 100% of the time on Do Not Disturb. My email is always closed down. So I do not experience distraction in the way that a lot of people do. And I break down in my book, Redeeming Your Time, as you know, how anybody can pull this off, whether they're in sales or writing full-time. I have the luxury of writing pretty much full-time, so I could do that a little bit more easily than others. But yeah, I'm sitting down usually for 2 hours and just cranking away at wherever I am in a particular project. So that might mean, 2 months of concepting the next book. Or if I know what the next book is, it could be outlining and writing it. If I'm writing a kid's book, it probably means taking a really, really long walk to work out the rhythm of these kids' books that I'm pumping out. We're doing about one a year right now. So it all depends. But the organizing umbrella of that 2 hours is I am working on creating that next piece of IP, right? That's what's going on those first 2 hours.
Okay. That's great. Yeah, you do cover a lot of this in Redeeming Your Time, which I highly recommend. I have to say I have a love-hate relationship with OmniFocus, thanks to you, Jordan. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Still working out the kinks. But yeah, highly recommend that book. Go check it out. Okay, so another thing that I think I'm hearing in your story that I would want to circle back to is a lot of writers say, I'm not sure I have time to write, and they haven't honestly even broached marketing. And so to hear you say that you've done as much marketing as you've done writing, and just that continual refrain that I hear as an editor, I don't have time to do this. You were a CEO of a tech company, correct, when you wrote your first book? And you did all of that marketing and all of that writing in that season of life. So give us some hacks. Give us some pointers on how do you actually write a book when you've got kids, when you've got full-time work and all of the things of life?
Yeah. So, and let me clarify something. So today, I've been quote unquote writing full-time for 5 years now. Yeah. So my marketing does not take place anymore in that first 2 hours. But when I was running this venture-backed tech startup called Threshold and writing 2 books called The Great Master of One, which by God's grace are both 5 stars and lots of reviews on Amazon, I was running this company full time. So that was a crazy season. I would wake up at 4, I want to say, and drive downtown after I took a shower. I would be at my desk at around 5, and I would work from 5 to 6:30. I was doing a 90-minute block back then. And I was either writing, or when I got done with those titles, I did spend those 90 minutes on marketing those titles. And I think the secret for me, man, there's just such blessing in constraints. In a lot of ways, I miss those days of only having 90 minutes a day to build up my books, because it forced me to be a ruthless essentialist, right? I knew that there was no way I could do email marketing, podcast marketing, Instagram marketing, LinkedIn marketing well. I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it all. So I had to pick one platform to really master. And at first, I didn't know what that platform was. So I was placing a bunch of little bets in a bunch of different places, right? Yeah. I was trying Instagram. I was trying YouVersion. I was trying building my email list in some organic ways. But then once something tipped, which for me was YouVersion, right? YouVersion really hit. And I wasn't doing what most authors did. I wasn't using YouVersion to sell books. I was using it to build my email list off YouVersion, right? Yeah. So once that started to tip, I turned everything else off and went all in. I was just cranking out as many plans as I could on YouVersion to build the email list. And by God's grace, I went from 0 email addresses on my list when I started writing Called to Create to something. I want to say we had 20,000 email addresses at the end of a year when Call to Create came out, right? Which, not a huge list, but a healthy list to launch a book. I think we sold 8,000 copies on week 1 of Call to Create. So I think the secret, quote unquote, for me was, number 1, disciplining myself to work on this book every single day. Number 2, being okay with the tremendous amount of sacrifice it took to make for those 4 years, 4 years I was doing that. Waking up at 4 a.m. every single day was not freaking easy, right? I was tired. I was also
so
traveling. I had a really, really demanding job.
What? You don't wake up at 4 anymore?
I don't wake up at 5. I wake up at 5 now. Yeah. But then number 3, just like being really, really ruthless in discerning the essential from the noise. Like that was critical. And again, man, I lament not having to be that ruthless now. I still try to be, but honestly, it's harder to be ruthless about that focus when you've got 50 hours at your disposal as opposed to, 5 to 7.
Yeah, man. So helpful, Jordan. Thank you. Another thing I hear from writers is they struggle to come up with their concept, and maybe they have a ton of ideas and they're all over the place, or maybe they're kind of at a loss. You think like a marketer and an entrepreneur, which I think helps probably you identify, okay, what are the felt needs? What's a concept that people are going to flock to, and you don't just ideate in a room by yourself. You actually go and ask people, which I think is a huge learning that you can offer to other writers. I call it concept bias. Like everyone thinks their idea is great, that it's marketable, that's going to take off, myself included. And then at the end of the day, it's the readership that decides. So, what tips can you give us about choosing or maybe even refining a concept?
Yeah. Oh man, I love talking about this. I've thought a lot about this.
Yeah.
So this may be a lengthy list. Cut me off if you want to, but there are 8 things I'm looking for before committing to a concept. Number 1, is there anything the spirit is clearly stirring inside of me? Right? If so, man, I got to head in that direction. Number 2, I'm looking for data that proves that my existing audience is hungry for this topic. I do not poll my audience, right?
Yeah.
I am looking for data, and I am constantly testing concepts. You mentioned my weekly devotional, The Word Before Work, which if you're listening, you can sign up for free at jordanraynor.com.
Do it.
I write these in series, much like pastors would do a sermon series, right? So I write these in series. Pretty much every series in there, I'm testing out a book concept, right? And I'm looking at the data to see, for example, what is the percentage of people who open that email and click to share that devotional on social media, right? Then after I've sent out the devotionals via email, I package them up at as YouVersion plans and look at the plan ratings and look at the subscription data and look at the percentage of people who are completing that plan. All of that is data that's telling me not just what people say they want, but what people prove they want by their digital habits. So again, 8 things I'm looking for in a concept. Number 1, what the spirit storing inside of me. Number 2, data that proves my audience is hungry for the topic. Number 3, I'm looking for value per page potential. The vast majority of books should have been blog posts. I try really hard to get to a place with a book where somebody would spend not just $20, but $2,000 on the product, because they're not just giving you $20. They're giving you 5 hours of their life. There better be $2,000 worth of value in that book to make it worth their while. Number 4, I'm looking for the potential that a concept would introduce my brand to new audiences. Number 5, I look for a vision for a product stack that I could build beneath the book. So that includes, could this book be a killer keynote? What's the course to sell as an ancillary product? Is there a retreat to sell on the back end of the book? Next, I'm looking for my excitement to write about this topic for the next 10 years. I got this advice from Carey Nieuwhof years ago. He's like, listen, before you commit to write a book, you better be prepared to talk about it for a decade, because if it hits, that's what's going to happen, right? So I think that's really important. I think I'm on number 7. I got to have confidence that I can frame the concept in an original way. One of the top concerns I hear from aspiring writers is that, everything's been said before, right? Like, I'm afraid my book won't be original. Listen, Ecclesiastes tells us there's nothing new under the sun, but it's not in the content. It's not the content that has to be original. It's the frame, right? So Redeeming Your Time is a really good example of this. There's 60,000 time management books on Amazon, right? But nobody had ever written a time management book through the lens of how the most productive person to ever walk the earth, Jesus Christ, managed his time. That was a unique frame. 90% of that content's been said elsewhere, but a unique frame for teeing up that content. And then finally, the 8th thing I'm looking for, and this is really icing on the cake, but if I can find it, oh man, I'm super jazzed about it, is just franchisability, right? Which I have not cracked the nut on this quite yet. I think I'm close with 2 concepts my agent is currently shopping. But man, if there is an opportunity to take one book and turn it into 12 with little additional effort, yeah, I'm pretty excited about that. So those are the 8 things I'm looking for, man.
Yeah, that's really good. So much there. Yeah, so in terms of felt need, that's often a big one that we point to as editors. Felt need just meaning people can readily identify, hey, I need this book because, or this problem being presented is one that I face and I really desire a solution to. Do you determine most of that through sort of the surveying you do and taking your audience you've accrued? Is that where you kind of lean into that most?
Yeah, it's a good question. So when I talked about the data I'm collecting from my audience on this kind of micro-sized, bite-sized content, each of those pieces of content, let's say a 4-day devotional on YouVersion, starts with a 1-sentence description that is the value prop of that micro content. Okay. And then, so I've already articulated a really clear felt need in that micro content. Then once I choose the concept, I refine it even further. So the first step I take, once I've chosen a concept and I'm ready to clarify it, I do not go past go until I can say in 1 sentence what the value prop of the book is, right? So for example, Redeeming Your Time is a book that helps Christians manage their time the way Jesus managed his. That was the value prop, right? Manage time management, felt need, super, super clear. This book we just released, The Sacredness of Secular Work. Sacredness of Secular Work is a book that helps Christians understand how their work matters for eternity, even when they're not sharing the gospel. That was it. That was a 1-sentence description. So I'm trying to really nail down that felt need statement. And I do some dramatic stuff in the writing process. I basically glue that thing everywhere. At the top of every single chapter outline is that 1-sentence description. And I have to justify that every word I write in the book has to fall under the banner of that thing. Because I see so many authors make this mistake, man, of their books are about 50 things and there's no real organizing umbrella for those 50 ideas. I force myself to make sure that everything hits on that core promise to the reader for that book. Yeah.
Man, I don't know anything about writers being all over the place as an editor. Never encountered that. That is...
Never seen that.
I love it's so actionable too, but the 1-sentence idea, because if you can't say something in a few words, ain't no way you're going to say it in a lot of words. And
correct.
I do some, author coaching, and people get frustrated sometimes because I'm forcing them to do those one-liners, and they're like, let's get to the good stuff. But it's really fruitful in the long run. So that
is the good stuff. By the way, the template, the format, if you're listening, you got to fill in these blanks. Working title X is a book for audience Y that helps them do value proposition Z. That's the formula. And you can't, in my opinion, I don't know many writers who can write a 5-star book without that being insanely clear. Now, some authors can figure that out in the middle of a project, but you're going to do a lot more work and spend a lot more hours on the book than if you just took the time on the front end to nail it down before you start outlining and writing.
Yeah, really helpful. Okay, so with our last few remaining minutes, I'd love to talk about platform. It's sort of the dreaded word these days, especially for aspiring writers who really want to land a book deal. Obviously, it matters. Speaking as an editor, of course, we're always looking at platform, not because we're evil and judging the size of someone's following, but because making books is a business, and it's an expensive business at that. And so we want to see that there's some momentum. Jordan, I think that you have just so much wisdom when it comes to, someone who wasn't just like gifted this incredible platform, or someone who's coming from a place where they already have a ton of network to draw from. I mean, you were certainly well connected, but you did a lot of the building and the strategizing and the marketing using skills you had, and you've built it over time. And that's a rare template. I think most, I don't know, like, especially for your level of success as a writer and how many book contracts you've signed. So, I mean, this is such a vast question, so I'm trying to narrow it. Yeah. But, what would be some great first steps for someone who, let's say they have a couple hundred followers total across their social platforms. They have not started an email list. Maybe they have a blog that's collecting digital dust. A couple, like their mom reads it and a couple of their friends read it. But there's a spark in them, as you said, the Spirit's put this message in their heart, and maybe they've stewed on it for a couple years and they're like, I want to do this, but platform is the obstacle. So what would be your advice for someone in that situation?
Yeah. My advice would be a couple things. Number one, you have to believe in your bones that the 80-20 principle is a law of the universe. Like, there may be no more important principle for you to understand in building a platform. And the 80% of results of anything are going to come from 20% of inputs. You do not need every platform to work for you. You do not need to kill it on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and TikTok. You just got to make one work. That's it, right?
Yeah.
And I'm biased, but I'm strongly biased towards email. Right. And so now now you got to have an existing platform from which to build an email list from. Right. So the process is really simple, not easy, but really, really simple. Number one, create for building an email list. Let me be clear. The process for building a great email list. Number one, you got to be creating 5-star free content on a platform where there are millions of prospective readers / email addresses. That could be Instagram. It could be YouTube. It could be a blog. It could be YouVersion. I am strongly biased towards searchable platforms where the content lives forever instead of 30 seconds like on Instagram and TikTok. So I will always opt for a blog, YouTube, YouVersion, something like that. So step one, create 5-star content on a regular basis on those platforms. Step two, at the end of every single one of those pieces of content, offer another piece of 5-star free content in the form of a lead magnet that you give in exchange for that email address. And then number three, once people are on your email list, I think you got to find an excuse to regularly add even more free value to them on the email list to get them really, really jazzed about whatever you end up selling them via your book at some point in the future. So again, really simple, but really freaking hard to execute, and just takes time. It takes discipline. And frankly, and this doesn't get said enough in these conversations, takes God breathing over the thing to make it grow. Like, I think, we can give all the advice we want on a podcast like this on how to build a platform. But at the end of the day, 1 Chronicles 29, I think it's 10 through 12, where David's telling his son Solomon, and we get access to, he say, hey, wealth and honor come from God alone. I think we get out of that. And email addresses and platform. Unless God breathes on the thing, nothing's going to happen. But here's the thing, right? Like, that's terrifically freeing, because now I can engage in the work and focus on inputs rather than outcomes. I can focus on my faithfulness to the thing I believe God's called me to do, while trusting the fruitfulness of that thing to God, knowing that whatever results he produces in the work, massive success or epic failure, are all for my good. See Romans 8:28 and 29.
Wow. Sorry, I think you froze up there for a second. You back?
Yeah, I did. Did you get it?
Okay.
Yeah, back.
Yeah, we got it. Yeah, so, I was going to ask you, how do you build platform without losing your soul? And I think you're speaking to that now because there's so many strategies and marketing techniques and my goodness, comparison is a killer, right? When you're trying to build something and growth is slow and you're seeing maybe other people accelerating. And so, how have you navigated that, Jordan, in your own life? You've done very well, but there's always someone who has more followers, right? There's always books that sell more copies. So for as well as you've done, I'm sure that's a temptation for you. How do you navigate that in your own soul?
Yeah, this is really good, man. I actually have a note in Evernote that I just pulled up that I come back to on a fairly regular basis of how I escape the comparison trap. Number one, I got to confess my pride. That's really, I think, what's at the root of comparison, of thinking, oh man, God, I deserve better and more than what you've already given me. Number two, we just hit on it. 1 Chronicles 29:12. Remember that God produces every result, every single result. Every good and perfect gift is from him, see James 1. And so he is free to grant favor to whoever the heck he wants. I can't complain about the favor that somebody else is getting because God's providing that. Even, by the way, if that person's a non-believer who is God's enemy, right? Number three, one helpful question I ask a lot is, am I even playing the same game as the person I'm comparing myself to? Right? It's like LeBron James wouldn't compare himself to Tiger Woods. Like they're playing totally different games. And I've fallen for this trap before. So Cal Newport's a friend of mine, right? And like sometimes I'll see Cal's success and be like, oh my gosh, Cal's killing it. I'm so jealous. And I'm like, wait, time out. I know that God has called me to write for Christians exclusively on the topic of faith and work. That's a really, really narrow lane. Like, what? I'm not playing the same game as Cal. It's just illogical to be jealous about that. Number four, man, I try on a regular basis to search my heart and ask the question, do I care about God's kingdom coming or my own kingdom coming, right? And especially within the church, like if I'm comparing myself to other authors, other Christian authors who are killing it, I'm like, hey, listen, is the kingdom being advanced here? If so, blessed be the name of the Lord if he chooses to do that through somebody else other than me. And then I think the fifth thing that I think about a lot is just remembering that God consistently calls us to the pursuit of excellence in Scripture. See 1 Corinthians 10:31, see Colossians 3, see Ephesians 6, et cetera, et cetera. But nowhere does he call us to the attainment of any level of excellence or success. To say it another way, I don't think God cares about you being the best. I think he cares a lot about you doing your best with the talents that he's put in your hands. I mean, I think the parable of the talents makes this abundantly clear, right? That the 5 talent and the 2 talent servants received the exact same blessing from their master, even though at the end of the day, the 5 talent servant had the biggest platform, right? He had the most impact, but they received the same blessing because God doesn't define success as winning or being the best. He defines success as stewardship and doing our best with whatever he's put in our hands. So, man, for me, Will, I'm constantly battling comparison. Like, I've not figured this out. But those are the 5 truths that I keep coming back to keep my head on straight and not lose my soul as I'm building my platform.
It's good words, Jordan. I think that's a great ending point as well. Just knowing that writing is a slog and it's a wonderful labor of love, but it's fraught with setbacks and requires discipline. But you've given, I think, some really practical handholds and first steps for those writers that really want to move forward and want to put in the time. And at the same time, like submit all of it to the Lord, as you said. And so, yeah, thanks, Jordan, so much for really, I think, modeling that so well. I mean, you got serious skin in the game, but there's also like this lightheartedness about you just a real sense that you're surrendered, to use an overused Christian word, but that you're content with where the Lord will lead your career, and you're malleable, and you've written some really thoughtful stuff. I've listened to several of your books at the gym on Audible, and have loved just learning from you about entrepreneurial ventures and calling and all those sorts of things. And so, yeah, thanks for your contributions to the kingdom so far, knowing that more are coming. I typically end just by asking, where can people follow you, find you? Feel free to, point us in any direction.
Yeah, it's real easy. Just jordanraynor.com, JORDANRAYNOR.com. There's lots of free resources for our listeners there, including the Word Before Work devotional that we talked about, the books that we talked about. Everything's right there at jordanraynor.com.
Awesome. All right, so go find Jordan on his website. And thanks again, my friend, for joining us. It's been really insightful and helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Will.